If you are familiar with syllables, syntax, phonology, morphology, sound symbol, relationships, and semantics are all the evidence-based elements of learning to read. Plus, we have the evidence-based teaching principles, right, which is systematic and cumulative, that is explicit and diagnostic. And too often, as many of you know, that systematic and cumulative has fallen by the wayside, and the explicit instruction has as well. And those things together really come out to equal effective instruction in reading. Sorry, I was getting a thing there. So our next slide, Stephanie, if you can advance that, is sort of an overview of the path forward. Well, okay, so we have the National Center. I think you went ahead one. Okay, anyway, I don't have that one, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so the state's falling behind. We're fifth on the bottom on the integration of scientifically based reading instruction into our educator preparation programs, which is really what we're talking about tonight and what really about the path forward is really about. The National Center for Teacher Quality has looked at evidence-based aspects of curricula in higher education and really focused on those 5 key areas of literacy, also called the 5 pillars of reading, which is phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So to do that, we need to have expectations for a proper amount of instructional time devoted to each of those core elements. And that is something that we haven't quite done in the past. We're reviewing the programs for the presence of reading practices that are contrary to the research. As you know, there are many aspects of our education programs that have really relied on methods that have not been proven to be reliable or effective or valid. And we're separately evaluating the opportunities that each programs provide to candidates to practice instruction for each component, and that's critically important. So this is the kind of state of where we are. If we can move that forward, Stephanie. So the Path Forward is an initiative that we started with the Hunt Institute. They have a model called the Path Forward, and it really requires, their model requires that all of those education institutions in the state work together to change things. And so this has been, I think, really something that's never happened in New York State's history. We have everybody together at the table moving this ball forward. And that includes the regents, and we'll be hearing from our Chancellor, Lester Young. It includes folks from the Literacy Academy Collective. It includes folks from the legislature, me. It includes folks from SUNY, CUNY, and the independent colleges and universities. So we're all working together to achieve the same result and to create the state action plan, which was launched in October and is now on our state ed website. And the action plan really is about collaborative work together so that we are able to outline those activities that will get us to that goal. So instead of just having a plan that says we shall do these things, we also are figuring out how we're going to go about doing that. And that will be a lot of what we'll be talking about this evening. And the basic structure of that team was a steering committee of 15 members that were responsible for the action plan. We had working groups that included 55 members from 3 major focus areas. And then the leadership team, which is the highest level of institutional leadership. So the commissioner was on board. The governor's office was on board. I forgot to mention they were at all the steering committee meetings as well. The regents were on board. You know, the chancellors of SUNY and CUNY and the president of the independent colleges and universities were also on board as the senior leadership team. So I want to stop there. That's our basic intro. We are going to ask the panelists, I'm going to ask each panelist to say hello very, very quickly because we need to turn it over to Dr. Mamie Hostetter, who has to leave early, and we really do want to hear from her. So we're kind of bumping her up. So don't feel bad, anybody else who's presenting, because we're going to ask Dr. Hostetter to say a few words at first. And Dr. Hostetter, I think you have a story to tell, which is your position as somebody who's running a school of education, and how you learned about the science of reading and this whole issue and what you did about it.
Yes, Assembly Member, thanks very much for having me this evening, and thanks for letting me tell a brief story to start us off. You laid out what it takes to learn how to read and how teachers help kids to do that in so many of our classrooms across New York. But the sad truth is, in not nearly enough of our classrooms across New York. And schools and teachers have so many jobs to do, but I would argue the number one job that we need to do for our students in our schools is to ensure that they all learn how to read well. And everybody who's here on this call is here in part because someone somewhere taught you how to learn to read well. I would invite you, if you're so inclined, to put that person's name into the chat. The odds are you're going to name your kindergarten teacher, your first grade teacher, or your mother. Those are the three likeliest candidates in terms of who teaches kids to read well. But really, all teachers should be prepared to help their kids, their students, read well. All right, I see the names coming in. Keep them coming. The problem is that most teachers learn how to teach reading in their teacher preparation program in college or graduate school. And for too long, too many of our programs have not been sharing the important lessons that Assemblymember Simon, you laid out so clearly in terms of what we need to do and how we need to do it in our classrooms. And in fact, at Relay, where we prepare thousands of teachers for New York City and have for almost 20 years now, where we have prepared tens of thousands of teachers across the country, we got a really alarming wake-up call on this about 6 years ago. Assemblymember Simon cited the National Council of Teacher Quality, NCTQ. They're like the most rigorous evaluator of teacher preparation programs across the country. They're sort of like the U.S. News and World Report of teacher prep, if you will. And they put out every 3 to 4 years an evaluation of all the teacher prep programs and their effectiveness in terms of teaching reading. And what we saw from the report that they put out about 6 years ago at Relay is that our program was earning an F, a failing grade in the eyes of NCTQ in terms of how we were preparing our graduate students to teach reading in their classrooms. And that was so far from acceptable to us. My colleagues at the time know, and my colleagues still know, that I'm a very even-keeled, steady Eddie type of leader, but I went through the roof and around the room about 25 times when that grade came out. But as I am proud to be the leader of Relay today, I'm proud to be the leader of Relay back then, because our colleagues saw this F as a big wake-up call to the institution. And we very quickly pulled in some outside expertise to help us revamp our teacher preparation program, such that I'm proud to say 3 years ago, when NCTQ did their, again, evaluation of reading programs, both here in New York State and across the country, Relay earned an A because we were using the scientifically based approach to teaching teachers how to teach kids to read. And Dr. Weatherton is going to drop in the chat the link to that report where you see Relay's A grade here in New York for our Reading Foundations coursework. But what you'll also see, unfortunately, is that we're one of only 2 teacher preparation programs in the entire state of New York to have earned an A grade from NCTQ, which means that the vast majority of our teacher prep programs here in New York need the opportunity that Relay had 3 years ago to bring in some outside expertise, to revamp our programs, to make sure that all of our teachers across the state are learning how to teach all of their students to read well. And I have to say, to bid you all adieu, but you're trading up, because my colleague, Dr. Weatherton, who's our provost of Relay's teacher preparation programs, is the leader who led this shift in terms of how we teach new teachers how to teach kids to read. And she was the very successful principal of a turnaround school where they too had to revamp how they taught their teachers how to teach their early elementary students to read. So I will leave you all in the great hands of Dr. Weatherton and Assemblymember Simon. Thanks for the opportunity to tell the story about how we turn things around at Relay for our teachers and, most importantly, for the kids here of New York State. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and safe travels. Next, I want to Dr. Hossetter has introduced Dr. Weatherton, and we'll be calling on her in the future to answer questions for us. We're hoping to have a very interactive dialogue here with time for question and answer at the end. So for now, I'd like to turn this over. Basically, I want to just introduce our speakers and ask them to address some sort of very basic opening points that they'd like to make. And the first is our Chancellor of the New York State Board of Regents, Dr. Lester Young. He's a career educator, and he's served as a teacher, a guidance counselor, a supervisor of special ed, a principal, assistant commissioner with the State Education Department, and superintendent of Community School District 13 in Brooklyn, which I have the pleasure of representing, part of District 13. And as Chancellor of the State Board of Regents, Dr. Young has created opportunities for every child to succeed. His leadership resulted in establishing New York State's My Brother's Keeper initiative. And New York State is the only state in the nation to have enacted My Brother's Keeper into our state law and has an annual budget of $18 million. Chancellor Young has transformed the Board of Regents' approach to education, focusing on equity and excellence for all students. So thank you, Dr. Young, for joining us today. Naomi Pena. Naomi is the Director of Community and Family Engagement at the Literacy Academy Collective. Her oldest child was diagnosed with dyslexia 17 years ago and given an IEP. So she experienced firsthand the overwhelming complexity of the special education bureaucracy in New York City. She learned that the system of special education law was not just complicated, but often pointed people in directions that were not accurate for their children. And she joined the Community Education Council in District 1, where she lives, where she served as president for many years. As president of the CEC, which is like for those of you outside of the city, is like our school board, our local school board. She's a proud parent proud product of NYCHA. And she helped develop and implement the city's first district-wide diversity admission system and the first family resource center in District 1. She has a professional background in legal, marketing, operations, and finance. And then finally, we will be hearing later on from Yona Nemiroff, who's a violinist and swimmer who currently competing in the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program at Dwight School in New York City. She'll be attending Cornell in the fall, majoring in business and hotel administration. And she feels especially fortunate to have been given the gift of an education at the Windward School from 3rd through 8th grade, because Yona is dyslexic. And we're very excited to have her join us later on. Thank you, Yona. So to Naomi and to Dr. Young. Let's start with Dr. Young. Is it unusual for the Regents to get involved in an initiative like this? What convinced you to do this? Because you were at every steering committee meeting, and I want to applaud you for your real dedication and really showing up and being there. So, and what has it been like working in this type of coalition?
Sure, and good evening, and Assemblywoman, thank you for exercising the leadership to bring us all together this evening. So what is the why? So the first answer to your question, you're absolutely right. Typically, members of the board do not get that involved in these types of initiatives. However, both the commissioner and I felt so strongly about what happens with our young people in New York State that are not proficient readers, that not only did we feel personally obligated to participate, I actually felt a moral obligation that we had to do this to signal to everyone in the state how important this is. This is, you know, I don't think this is a lip service activity. I would say to you that if our young people attend public school and they're not reading proficiently by the 3rd grade, the data suggests that the life's outcomes for these young people are drastically limited. And I think it's actually, we're talking about people's lives. And so that's what motivated me. The second thing is really the way I think about education. The data is clear that there's significant room for improvement. But again, the way I've always considered public education is that our schools always have to be in a state of continuous renewal. And so to me, to be part of public education is to understand this is unfinished business. It's always unfinished business. And so we always have to be ready to do better than we are. The other 2 points that I think are important is that when we think about, and I've been asked this question by parents and others, well, what do I think the problem is? And so it's important for me as the chancellor to say to everyone that I don't believe, and there's lots of research to support this, that the barriers to learning to read don't reside in children. I actually think that it's our responsibility as educators to be accountable to ensure that every young person is successful in school, and that means that it's up to us to make sure that our young people have the foundations of early reading. So why don't I stop there and give my colleagues some opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. Naomi, I know you have a story you've told many times. Can you share this with the group and, why you got involved with this? And how would this initiative have changed your children's future?
Well, thank you, Joanne, for convening us. I am utmostly grateful to be sharing space with everyone, including Dr. Lester Young, who saw that this was just as important as I did when I started this journey almost 2 decades ago. So my oldest started school like every other child does. And I want to say by the holidays, I started getting complaints. And as a result, when there is concerns, they are told at the parent, and the parent does what parents do. You start to triage that stuff at home. And unfortunately, it started creating tension because, we're a village and we are supposed to support each other. But, when the kid is not paying attention and being distracted and avoiding doing the work, it's on me to figure out what's going on. So I vividly remember sitting him at the dinner table and going, "What is going on?" And he told me, "Mom, I don't know what it is. It's like my brain is not letting me." And, that was in his 7-year-old self trying to articulate there was something wrong. And I took that as a marching order. I spoke to his pediatrician. She recommended, getting evaluation, and I got everything that I needed. And ultimately, what was told to me was what my son was exhibiting was the benchmarks of someone who had dyslexia. And I didn't know what that was. So I went to where we all go, which is you run to Google and you start searching. And I discovered that there was an approach for students who have dyslexia. It's called Orth and Gillingham, and they can learn how to read doing this stuff. So I go to my public school and I tell my principal, and she's like, "No one has that. No one's trained in that. But we can, if you do the stuff on his IEP, you'll get better." Unfortunately, it did not. And my now 25-year-old son has lots of war stories that he can share of like how he felt and how he continues to feel, and how teachers, and I experienced some of this too, how, there was assumptions made about my family of like, did I have books? Was I reading to him? And if he cared enough about his education. And it all sort of met during COVID, where all our lives were upended. But I then had also 3 other kids who subsequently all have the diagnosis of dyslexia as well. And my youngest, one of my twins, was having a massive hard time. He was in 4th grade. He could not decode. He could not sound out words. He certainly could not type anything. And he was held back twice. And I knew that by then, like, this was not working. My son, my oldest, by then had transitioned to a District 79 high school to get his GED, and he was preparing his portfolio for the state. And ultimately, I had a day of reckoning for myself that I needed to figure something out because I was going to lose another brown boy. And I ended up finding an adequate school for him, but that meant that I needed to leave the public school system, something that I vehemently defend and believe in. And I decided like we have to do something different. So that's how Literacy Academy Collective came to be. And we are women who started a school support nonprofit geared to supporting designing the schools, literacy schools. But in what my experience led me to see is I didn't understand that teachers didn't know this. I thought they did. So I felt massively frustrated trying to explain to them that my son was dyslexic and hearing back the result of, oh, that's just reversing letters. They'll be fine. And I was like, there was a deep resentment I was experiencing where lots of pointing fingers and no one was answering me. Ultimately, what I've discovered through my work and what we do is teachers are not being prepared in a real thoughtful way. And, the truth is that the experience that my older son had is something that he carries with him to his day and something that I have deep guilt about because I wish I knew more. And I couldn't support him the way he needed, but I knew like if he had the experience that my youngest is experiencing, he would have had a completely different trajectory. And it's something that we owe it to all our kids in the state.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you said something early on that I noticed, in that you went to a pediatrician who suggested that you get your child evaluated. Too often when I've talked to parents over the years, the pediatrician just thinks they'll learn to read, right? Don't worry about it. They'll catch on when when they start worrying about sports scores, they'll start reading the sports scores in the paper kind of thing, and they'll learn to read. And most pediatricians don't know anything about it. So number one, what was great is your pediatrician actually knew to refer you. And that's another group of people that we need to influence, right? So that they can best provide information to the moms and dads who come to them asking these questions, because they're usually the first one to get that question, right? So I think that was great. The rest of it, I'm sorry, wasn't so great, but you hit the nail on the head that the teachers just don't know what dyslexia is. They too often think it's reading backwards. They don't know what to do. So they're not being difficult. They just don't know what to do. We haven't given them those tools. So Dr. Weatherton, that leads me to you because you're the person who orchestrated the turnaround at Relay School of Education. Can you tell us, how we can help teacher preparation programs be successful in implementing the state action plan?
Yeah, I think the first thing, Assemblywoman, that I want to call out is that in order to be effective, it's a portion of what Naomi described. There has to be some accountability for those outcomes and like who is going to be responsible. And I fundamentally believe, as a former public school teacher, public school principal, public school student, and the mother of a 16-year-old public school student and a neurodivergent 21-year-old former public school student, that the responsibility lies inside of the school building. And so with that in mind, I want to name that the action plan supports that goal of ensuring that all teachers prepared in New York State have the knowledge and skills needed to implement evidence-based instruction. At Relay, that's what we found was missing when we had an F score and moved that F to an A, that we needed to make sure that everything that we were doing was rooted in the science of teaching reading. And the action plan has the power to affect the way that we reach students, especially those who struggle to read. Where I believe the disconnect is that the regulations do not explicitly require us to include the science of reading. And so to support EPPs in the implementation, we need to make sure that they understand that that has to be a part of their curriculum, that the literacy coursework requirements are, while they are high level now and are broad, that success will include us integrating the science of reading with teacher candidates demonstrating proficiency in the science of reading through their exams, performance assessments, newly certified teachers understanding what it means to be a culturally responsive teacher, that the evidence-based literacy instruction is grounded in the science of teaching reading, and understanding that literacy is more than just reading. True literacy requires equal attention to speaking, to listening, to reading, writing, and includes attention to the cross-linguistic connections that our multilingual learners require. And so at the EPP level, when more students have a strong foundation in literacy and what it means to be a teacher that is proficient in the science of teaching reading, we know that more of their students will be able to engage with rigorous grade level work and assignments, and that the collaboration between EPPs and districts includes clinical experiences for teachers, professional development opportunities, and ultimately a coordinated approach to literacy instruction, so that ultimately this success is seen through P through 12 student literacy outcomes.
I was trying, somebody opened my door and I was trying to be careful. So, one of the parts of the state action plan includes an assessment of our programs, undergraduate and graduate programs, in elementary education, right? We started with that, the early readers, right? Even though many of us believe that we need to assess what's going on in programs teaching students in later years, because many of the students that arrive in teachers' classrooms don't know how to read, right? And then that's a much more difficult thing for somebody who's prepared in teaching history, not knowing anything about literacy, right? One of the things that is often said is it was the guy in the classroom before me, right? The guy before him and the guy before him. So it really is all of our obligation. So I think that is a very good point to be made. And one of the things I want to also mention is that we are, in the action plan, we are talking about revising those regulations. So the regulations more clearly lay out the obligation of programs to educate their students, their degree candidates in the science of reading, so that we can see those results in the classroom when the kids that they teach going out. We're building that pipeline. And so I thank you. That's very helpful information for folks. Now, Naomi, I just want to ask you a follow-up question about the stakeholders for the path forward, and legislators. How do we get the word out to schools and families? I know Dr. Young has strong feelings about this as well. Perhaps you can address how we can do that.
Well, I mean, I first need to give credit where credit is due. I mean, leadership matters, right? So, Dr. Betty Rosa, Dr. Lester Young have been very vocal on, like, this matters. Everyone needs to take charge, and we need to do this different. And this is why the approach of the path forward is so prescriptive when we entered into this cohort, because it required all these stakeholders to be in the same room. And Joanne, as the leader as part of the legislator, you have made this a mission as well, and you've spoken to everyone that has ears to make this important. And thankfully, many people believe that all kids can read and should be able to read. But I think we have to throw everything at this. So while this affects children and families, this also has to be talked about to teachers. This has to be talked about to administrators. This has to be, above in district levels, and at the various departments of education across the state, and also within the central offices of the region and the New York State Ed. So this is all and everything, and we need to talk about it relentlessly, and we need to let parents know that this is happening. Parents need to be able to feel confident to speak to their principals about what they're doing at their schools. principals should embrace this and say, I want educators, teachers that can come up and do this work. So that means like less, hopefully, not that PD goes away, but your PDs will look different because now teachers are showing up with an actual base that can be more fruitful and you can lead the work to a different direction. So I think it's really important that we're able to take this at a place where everyone is talking about this and it can be part of the vernacular. When you're talking about literacy, parents should be able to say, oh, isn't there a state working on something? Teachers should be asking their educated prep programs, what are you doing? I want to be able to teach kids better, because everyone needs to start being held accountable, and they will. But with that accountability has to come results. So parents should be able, teachers should be able to all ask these questions and ultimately get to the final destination, which is getting kids on reading level.
One of the things I wanted to sort of direct us to is, this can be getting something done at the state level doesn't filter down necessarily as quickly as we'd like. So I use as an example when I passed the dyslexia bill, which was effective in 2017. When a memo goes out from state ed to the schools and the superintendents to say, yes, you're allowed to use the word dyslexia in an IEP and dysgraphia and dyscalculia or in your eligibility documents. I still hear from parents that they're told by their principals, by their IEP teams that they're not allowed to use that, which was never true anyway under the law, but it was a myth. It's hung on for now 50 years, right? And so one of those issues is getting the word out to people. So we do want parents to know about it. We want principals and superintendents to know about it. So they start using that as a hiring criteria, that they look at whether or not those candidates learned about the science of reading. That will also help juice up building that pipeline in our EPPs. And so, Dr. Young, I know this is something that's near and dear to your heart as well. How do you think we can help getting this word out to parents, to schools, so that they become part of this? Because the Path Forward plan is really a higher ed plan, right? Changing higher education. But of course, the whole point of doing this is to influence education and how our kids learn to read.
So one of the, there are a variety of ways, but one of the key ways that we on the board communicate our expectations, quite honestly, is through our policies and regulations. And I think, in fact, I've had conversations with school and district leaders, and they often say, well, we can always tell when the board wants us to do something by the regulations and policies you pass. And so one of the things we're in the process of doing, and that's why this collaboration and this talking to a variety of stakeholders becomes so important, because that is becoming a model for us. We don't, I'll be honest, we're not always the best at listening to all of the voices in the state. And so what we've attempted to do in this process, and it's really filtering out in other areas, is making sure that we're listening to parents, that we're listening to students, and we're listening to other important stakeholders, and not just the official designated stakeholders. The other part of this that I think is critical, and Naomi has said it a few times, and that's the important role that parents and caregivers play in this. I believe that one of the biggest failures that we've had in public education is we have this uneven information distribution system in New York. And what am I saying? I'm saying that there are some places, place matters, right? In New York. And there's some places they have the information. The parents have the information, and they know how, and armed with that information, they know how to advocate for their children. They know what questions to ask in schools. Well, that's not true every place. You know, New York has some of the best schools on the planet that unfortunately they're just not available to everyone. And so for me, when we talk about equity, it's really about how do we not only ensure that we have the right policies and regulations in place, but that we figure out better ways to ensure that all parents have access to the information that they need, so that they're in a position to ask the right questions, right? That you know, parents want the best for their children, so they have to have the information they need so they can advocate on behalf of their children. So I think that's also critical. And I think the process that we're using has been very informative on how to do that. Now, how do we go from issuing the memo and the regulation to ensuring that that has a makes a difference in classrooms? Well, I think Dr. Weatherton said it. I believe it was Dr. Weather, maybe it was Naomi, that leadership matters. You know, we have to do a better. It's not just making sure that the teacher preparation programs begin to reflect the context of the world of the public school system, but we have to make sure that our leader preparation programs also reflect what's
Mhm.
going on. You know, if you know how many times have we interacted with school leaders in addition to teachers, but school leaders in this instance, and they say, "Well, I really wasn't prepared for this. You know, I don't know anything about this." And I would say to you, that's a problem. That's a huge problem that we've got to fix and we've got to take it on. So I think that we have to make sure that every level in the system understands what we're talking about. And then ultimately, um, we have to, uh, and this may sound strange, what I've also, one of the leadership lessons that I've learned over time is that I really can't make anyone do anything, right? The only thing I can do is adjust my behavior and try to do it in a way that makes it in your best interest to change your behavior. And so for me, the question I always have to ask is, what do I need to do to ensure that this is actually happening? And I think that's why the plan becomes so critical, because not only is it a plan that tells us what to do, the plan tells us what success looks like. And I think that's also critically important, right? So that we, you know, we're not just holding ourselves accountable for doing things, we're actually holding ourselves accountable for having an expectation of success for all students in the state.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, you know, one of the things you just sort of pointed out something in the state plan, but a question for any of the panelists tonight is, you know, what do you think is or what part of the state action plan is most critical? You know, Dr. Young, you were talking about making sure that school leadership, we have educational leadership programs, for example, and we don't include the science of reading and what it is they need to learn. Not that they need to be experts, but just know what it is. Right. So, you know, what do you think are most critical elements of the state action plan? You know, we're starting off, this is our second year. We've pulled a lot together on how it is we're going to be doing these assessments of the programs and launching that effort. And I'm proud to say we got some money in the budget to enable state ed to have more staff to be able to do that. You know, I'm curious what all of you think about, you know, what's most critical about the state action plan. And it may be a part of the plan, or it may be the fact that we did a plan. What do you think? So Dr. Weatherton, why don't you talk about it since you've already led one of those efforts?
Yep. Thank you for the question. In full transparency, I think the 6 actions work together. So I would not prioritize one over the other. I think the absence of any one of them leave us right back at the chat. I was trying to read the chat to keep up with what
Yeah.
the parents were saying. I think the dashboard that is being created is going to be essential without proper funding, we won't be able to have even environments like this where we're all together on Zoom with parents feeling empowered to ask questions connected to retaliation if they're reaching out to their schools. And so I think it's critical for us to understand the connectedness and alignment of the 6 actions and would not prioritize one over the other.
Thank you. Naomi?
I think, listen, I think I'm always a big skeptic. So I hope for the best, but plan for the worst always. So the fact that, we were able to convene, the heads of all these institutions at one time across the state. We had the heads of CUNY, SUNY, the privates, and all acknowledge that they want to do this and they need to do this is, to me, I have to say, the most powerful thing I've ever seen in my life. Because, for no one is, I equate this to brain surgery, right? Like, if you need brain surgery, you go to a doctor who's been licensed and knows what they're doing, right? You do not want to go to a brain surgeon who took the test but didn't really know all the content and is going to practice on you. So teachers are very similar. They're literally rewiring the brain. This is almost brain surgery, yes. And we want to be able to empower these teachers to leave with the degree and the skills. So when they're hired, they show up in the classroom, they can command the room, and also they can help when they see a child that's struggling. They go, oh, wait, I read about this. I'm now seeing this in action and I know what to do. So the fact that we're empowering teachers in a very unique way, I think, to me, is at the core what this is. Like, no one's passing the blame. Everyone is taking accountability, because ultimately what matters, and I always repeat this, what matters is about the children in those seats and ensuring that they are able to do what we expect them to do, which is to be literate in a very literate world. So I'm just excited that we're here, because all the wheels are turning, and I'm excited that we might be able to do something really amazing in the next decade.
I'm looking at the chat as well, and I'm seeing a lot of comments about teachers who raise these issues being told to keep quiet. People, the leadership arguing or saying, we just don't have that. One of the reasons I think this myth about not using the word dyslexia came about is because early on in 1975, when the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed, and I was in grad school at the time, nobody knew what to do with learning disabilities. Nobody understood it. And so it was a category, but there are 13 categories in the IDEA, right? But you can say the name of the disability in any other category. You can say the type of blindness a child has, because it makes a difference as to how you educate that child, whether they have tunnel vision or macular degeneration. Makes a big difference, right? So understanding what's going on with the child. But this was a way, I think, that everybody kind of danced around that issue, and then it became like an urban myth kind of thing, or maybe not even urban, but everybody's myth, that you couldn't use that word. And that has really led us to this path where people really just don't understand it, where we've come up with approaches like, the MTSS approach, which it has its roots in highly trained teachers being able to identify what's going on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that actually hasn't come to fruition. No Child Left Behind was passed without recognizing that the teachers were leaving the kids behind because nobody was helping the teachers arm themselves with the information they needed, right? So, it's going to be somewhat of a struggle to right that ship. But, Chancellor, you're in a leadership position, and, how is it that leadership can help push this way forward so that people aren't being told to be quiet about this? They may not have the staff in-house, but what are they going to do about that? How can we help them do that? Because this is not about blame. This is about helping school districts, right? How can you offer some perspective on that?
Yeah, sure. The we all know what happened when we implemented that carrot and stick approach
Yeah.
to try to change behavior. So I want to be clear, that's really not what we're suggesting. But I also think we're also recognizing that we're not just talking about having teachers being able to pass another state test, right? This is more than just being smart about teaching. And I have to say that, you know, I get to say this publicly to everyone. I had the amazing opportunity to sit in on a relay class, graduate class, and I actually witnessed what they do. And you know, you can always tell if this is the culture, right? If this is what's really going on. And I sat in and watched with amazement how they focus not only on what the teachers knew, but what they can actually do in the classroom. And so teaching is an active process, right? It's more than just being able to pass a test and do I know the right answer? Do I know it when I see it? The real question is, what are you able to do about it when you see it? And I think that for me, the heart of the enterprise is how do we change not only what teachers are being prepared to do, but how they're being prepared to do it. And I think when we actually focus on that, when we actually figure out more ways where we can have what I saw at Relay replicated around the state and some of the other teacher residency models that I've seen, and get away from this idea that, well, we don't have enough time to do this, right? The way that you become an effective teacher is by spending time in a classroom, um, working under the mentorship of a highly effective teacher, right? You know, that's what makes a difference. You know, putting in the time to try to figure out the real problems that are occurring. You know, how do you really understand this whole notion of cultural responsiveness, right? There's a context for learning. And so experience matters. And that's what the plan is attempting to do. It is really attempting to transform the way we prepare teachers as well as school leaders. So for me, I think that's what's most important, um, and helping people change their behavior so that when they get in classrooms with whoever the students are that they're facing, that they understand that yes, they have to know the content, they have to know the pedagogy, but they have to know the children and how they learn. That is perhaps the most important part of this. And I think that comes from spending high quality time actually working in schools and classrooms. So for me, I think it's important that the plan reflect that.
Thank you. You know, a lot of people have posted in the chat about retaliation and retaliation against teachers and others. And of course, just a little, as a civil rights lawyer, that's illegal. But that is also not a good answer for getting what your kids need and working in collaboration, right? It's a chilling effect on people raising these issues if in fact they feel retaliated against or they feel that their voices aren't heard. And yes, I know that everybody knows it's illegal, but it's one of those things that I think we're going to be looking at more clearly in terms of leadership, in terms of holding our, you know, superintendents and principals accountable. And remember that this effort for the path forward is about building that pipeline of teachers who will know what to do in the classroom better. So many of our kids are struggling with reading, and they're not all dyslexic. 65% of our kids or 60% of our kids who aren't reading proficiently, they're not all dyslexic. They just haven't been instructed. And when teachers know how to deliver the right instruction in a way that children's brains process the written language, then they will have fewer of those kids that they refer to special ed, which a lot of times has a bad name, right? That it's a dumping grounds, that we refer every kid, that there's too many of those kids and they cost a lot of money, and all of that kind of conversation that's a really resistance kind of conversation. And so our goal here is to make sure that we put out into the school systems in the future teachers, new teachers, pre-service teachers, when they get into in-service, who are well prepared to teach reading in a way that kids learn. And in the meantime, we are going to have to struggle with some of these issues. And I know one of the things that, is important to me, and I think that, is coming out in a lot of the things that are popping up in the chat, and that is that there are real impacts to denying kids the services they need. There's a lot of impacts to squelching, parents speaking out or teachers speaking out and raising these issues. And that has a mental health impact. We have huge mental health issues that came to the fore post-COVID, but many existed before that. But our kids with disabilities often feel a tremendous amount of anxiety. And of course, when they're not given the instruction they need, they feel bad about themselves and they feel stupid, and they're not. Right. So we really need to get at this at many levels. And so one of the things I know that the Regents and I know State Ed has worked on this year is really providing better information to schools so they can address the mental health issues that children have. And here, unfortunately, in some schools, we're creating those mental health issues. We're exacerbating those mental health issues by denying kids the right diagnosis, or treating kids who just haven't been instructed as if they're not worthy. And that's something that we really want to stop happening. And I know it's a big cultural shift, and I know that it's very frustrating. And I know, like 20 years ago, when I was head of the Dyslexia Association in New York, I remember somebody very senior in the city school system saying, we have to assume that if a teacher gets out of a teacher preparation program, they know how to teach reading. And of course, that assumption was so far from the truth, because so many of them didn't know how to do that. And we're really working hard at getting away from that assumption being the case, and really making sure that we identify those schools that are doing a terrific job with training our teachers, and start actively trying to recruit from those schools. And that competition and that demand will make a difference as well. What I think we're about ready to sort of wrap in this part of our segment of our program. I'm going to ask Yona to share her story and a little video, and then we'll move on to Q&A. And I know many of you will have questions.
Hi, I'm Yona Nemiroff, and I'm a senior currently in high school, but I'll be attending Cornell University next year. I found out I was dyslexic in around third grade. Until third grade, I was in a duolingual school, and I was kind of the only student who really wasn't reading by the age of like first grade. Everyone else in my class, I realized there was something off when everyone else, like there was free time and people would pick up a book, and I wouldn't pick up a book because I couldn't read the book. And this kind of, as like the year progressed, I became more and more frustrated because I felt that there was no one around me who felt the same way, and teachers kind of didn't know what was up. And so I left that school at the age of like 10, and I started attending the Windward School, which is a school that focuses on teaching students with learning disabilities. And this decision really changed my life, because at Windward, these teachers have been trained to really focus on helping students who have learning disabilities. And kind of for the first time, I was actually raising my hand in class and felt that like I could participate because my answers weren't stupid. And I really learned how to self-advocate for myself, which has been such an important skill for me to learn. And so I graduated Windward in 8th grade and moved on to another high school that's an international baccalaureate high school. And because of the skills I received at Windward from the incredible teachers, I been able to thrive in this curriculum, taking like advanced classes. And I really, with the skills I learned, like self-advocacy and kind of how to study, and specifically like my dyslexia never went away, but what was really important was that I learned how to kind of handle it and how to approach classes and situations and be able to do as well as the other students with my dyslexia. So I'm really grateful to have received such an important education, but I do realize that a lot of students are not lucky enough to receive that education. So it's really important that the public school system has teachers that can adequately be teaching these students. So I wanted to kind of put a voice and put like a face to these students, and not like, especially for legislators, when they're kind of hearing about why it's so important to get involved in dyslexia legislative. So I created this video where I interviewed a bunch of students with learning disabilities and kind of had them share their stories. So it's a short little video that puts a face to these students and kind of tells you where they're at.
Stephanie, we need the sound on.
Stephanie, can we restart this with sound?
Remember that the most powerful thing, the greatest impact you're gonna have is just telling your story.
I wouldn't raise my hand because I just never knew the answer. And anytime I raised my hand, I would get it wrong and people would laugh. It was embarrassing. So then I was taken outside of class every day. I was put with 2 other kids, but we just had to go and learn by ourselves. And we didn't get to interact with the other students. And it was hard. I felt stupid. It was no fun.
To me, it's like a different way to learn. Sometimes when I face the schools, like reading stuff and seeing like triple the amount of words.
The challenges in school were definitely teachers and like not understanding me. I first noticed it in like kindergarten, I think. I couldn't get it down right. I always had notes.
I think that's cool. And it makes me keep trying until you get it.
Yeah, so I think my learning disability helped push me to self-advocate more. I think I'm like the best self-advocate in my grades.
When I was younger, I would wear my hood and my sweatshirt and my coat all day during class, so I never could get called on and they wouldn't see me, so I never embarrassed myself. It's pretty funny now looking back at that I really wore my hood. I think there was one day it was 70 degrees and the class was hot. And I wouldn't take my coat. I was sweating. They don't want me to coat.
So since I have a learning disability, organizing is definitely something I'm forced to or like need to use.
I have this learning specialist take me outside class. She recognized right away what was not wrong with me, but how I need to be taught. And she really just helped me learn how to decode and break down words and just recognized my issues and understood them. And if it wasn't for her, I don't know what I would do or where I would be.
I would go to her after class and talk to her. And it's like a safe space because she didn't judge me if I had more questions, and she would just talk through it with me and really help me understand what is happening in class.
I used to be afraid to raise my hand. I'm now the first person who has her hand up when a question is asked. Thinking differently provides me with a creative way to problem solve. With early detection and proper teacher training, we can turn dyslexia from a disability into a superpower.
Thank you, Yona. That was great. Yona filmed kids at last year's Dyslexia Advocacy Day, which we all know is going to be Wednesday this week. And I'm looking forward to seeing many of you there. And we're celebrating, this is our 10th anniversary of doing Dyslexia Advocacy Day in New York State. And it's one of those things, you know, it takes a lot of little things to get the ball rolling, but the more people that hear about it, the more legislators who are dyslexic themselves or have family members who are dyslexic participate in this day. We will also be passing a resolution on the floor proclaiming Wednesday Dyslexia Advocacy Day. So, you know, it's great to hear these young voices. Thank you so much, Yona, for doing that. Junior in high school, she made this video. I'm looking forward to great things from you as well, Yona. So I'm now going to open this up to questions and answers. And Allison, are you going to be sort of monitoring who's who and timing and whatnot?
Well, I will definitely be monitoring timing, but I will pass it over to Susanna,
Okay.
who can assist calling on people.
On who to call on. Okay. So if you raise your hand, use your reaction, the hand raising function. Some of you have put a lot of questions and comments. I think one person suggested a hotline to call for retaliation, right? I think it's a very good idea. It's certainly something that I'm happy to talk with our colleagues in state ed about doing, because if nothing else, we'll collect a lot of data. But it really shouldn't be a part of anybody's experience in education, and it is too often reality. So I thank you all for raising that issue. It's very, very important.
Great. So if you can, I know many of you already put a question in the chat, but you'll have the opportunity to ask it yourself. We just ask so that we can get to everybody's questions to keep it brief. So make a comment and a question, and then we will unmute you. And if you'd rather just have us read it from the chat, we can do that as well. But we would love to hear from you if you want to ask the question.
And if you have a question for anybody in particular, if you could identify that, that would be helpful.
Okay. So, you know, while we're waiting for people to put their hands up, let's just close out with that question. So the question was really, what protections do parents and students have when advocating for themselves and being retaliated against? And then there was the suggestion of a dedicated line to report retaliation, bullying, harassment to parents and kids. So what protections do parents and students have now?
Well, as somebody said, we all know it's illegal. But of course, there are many things that are illegal, but then you have to raise that point legally, right? And, you know, under an IEP, you know, there was a big case, there was a trial actually out in Washington State where the teacher won, but she had been, if not fired, certainly retaliated against for advocating for one of her kids in school. And it ended up in a trial, and she won that trial, and there were damages paid to her for her pain and suffering. Not going to be a very common situation, because, you know, one of the benefits she had was her husband was a lawyer who represented her, so she didn't have to pay out of pocket. But it was a very important finding, because we do see that happening, and there isn't a really good way to address it. One thing one could always do, of course, is file with one of the federal enforcement agencies. Now, that's a problem since they have decimated the Office of Civil Rights, which handles so many of those cases. Not, you know, I worked with them a lot representing students who were in higher ed and taking tests, but they also did a lot of P through 12 case law as well. And so there are many fewer people there now, and it's not clear if they're trying to get rid of the Department of Education, what kind of enforcement mechanism will exist that you can rely on at the federal level. So then we're talking about the state level. And of course, there is the IEP process, but of course, if it's retaliation against a parent, that's not really an IEP issue, right? That is another issue. It's a discrimination issue under our state human rights law, for example. But that means you can complain to the State Division of Human Rights, or you can file an action in court. And that, of course, is complicated, can be expensive, you know, by the time the court gets around to a ruling in some of these cases, you've suffered a great deal for a very long period of time, and maybe your child's already out of school by the time that result. So it's particularly difficult path to hoe. Could be successful and it could be quickly, and they could settle with you, but that is a challenge. And so if there's some way that we can, you know, be helpful in that regard, whether it's a hotline or something else, is something that I'm going to certainly take back to my leadership and talk about with education leadership in the state.
Great. So Donna Keel has a question. Go ahead, Donna.
Hi, my name is Donna Keel, and I want to thank you all for this. I came in a little bit late, and I actually think toward the end of Assemblyman Simon's comments, you were getting to it. My experience is with my son, and at this point, he is about to graduate in about a year from Morehouse College. He had probably a similar path to Yona. We discovered something was wrong in around third grade. We found out he was dyslexic. He would eventually make his way to the Windward School and so on and so forth. I think the struggle for me as a parent was in being in that first IEP meeting, and admittedly, whether it's a admission or not, he was already in private school. And I wasn't sure once we got on this path, what would happen. But that one IEP meeting I attended, and we had gotten an initial evaluation like maybe a year before, because it also took a long time just to get to the IEP meeting. From the point that I triggered the request of the Board of Ed, I'm in New York City, I'm in Manhattan, to even say something is wrong, et cetera, it took months for them to respond back, months for us to get an IEP meeting. And then by the time we get it, they're not really acknowledging what's already in the evaluation we have. And I don't know when I felt like the Board of Ed itself became like the obstacle to getting my son the help that he needed, or getting us the setting, potentially the settings. If I was going to consider public school after that one ordeal, I'd be like, we're not going to do that. We're going to have to find another way, even if there's some gym of teachers who are very capable to support him. But I guess, like, where is that help, or where is a better process even for the timing? Because you, like you said, you lose time, and every minute on that 7-8-year-old brain counts to get your child, where they're going. I apologize. That's my question somewhere in there. I'm sorry.
I would defer to some special ed lawyers. I haven't done special ed practice in some years, but I think you're in the Nickerson letter department, which is that they're supposed to respond within a certain period of time under the law and under the federal regulations. In a education system as complex and as multifaceted and volume alone, in New York City, it gets a little complicated. But I think your experience of feeling like the school system was, the barrier, I think is a common experience, even outside of New York City. And I think a number of people who have commented on the chat are from outside of New York City and have shared similar experiences. So yes, there should be quicker. There should be better staff to do this. It's been a complicated maneuver. We had very few hearing officers working in the city. We now have a process that they're going through, but it's not necessarily speeding things up. It's almost kind of pushing more things into a hearing, which ultimately ends up taking longer. So I think there's a lot of refining of the school districts, organizations around education and special education that needs to be done. And it's quite a big operation. So it's certainly something I'm not unaware of. And it's something I think you need to bring to the city council, right? To push them, to push the Department of Education to do that. And I think, when you're, not to get political, but there's a mayor's race on, right? When you're looking at that, think about who actually you trust to be, because it's mayoral control, who actually you trust to be leading the schools. And what's their education IQ? What's their disability education IQ? Those are some questions I think a lot of times people don't think to ask, but I think is critically important, because if there are two big things in the city and the state, the two biggest sections are health and education in terms of where our dollars go. And I think people need to think about that when they're making those decisions. and make it an issue, a campaign issue.
Right. So one of the questions was about the timeline of the path forward and the urgency around kids who are in school now. And some people commenting that, they have ninth graders and the path forward sounds great, but what are we doing for the ninth graders right now?
Well, that is a good question. Now, remember, the path forward is about building that pipeline of teachers. And just Susanna Laura Varas has her hand up, physical hand up, not the little hand emoji thing. And that is that, we totally understand that and totally understand that concern about immediacy. This is a 3-year plan to basically create the plan, refine it to create the mechanisms for how we're going to institute that plan, and then begin the implementation of that plan. We're in the middle of that second year right now. And so among the things we're doing is the programs will be evaluated and assessed for how much they are including the science of reading. There is an effort to modify regulations to really implement the science of reading in our schools and in instruction in the higher education realm, and also modification of the teacher licensing exam. And then the other thing we're doing is there's a dashboard that we will have what programs are in fact measuring up, right? So that people who are looking at colleges of education can look and see what schools are measuring up and what the ultimate outcome is for their teachers when they go out into the field. But of course, in higher ed, it's going to take a few years before the student who arrives on the doorstep of an EPP in September or August will get that education and be out in the classroom. It's going to take a little bit of time. So that building the pipeline is something we've needed to do for years. I have a bill for that for many years. I have a bill for early identification and universal screening, because we know early identification, when you address the issue, produces the best results. And we have fewer kids who feel like they're stupid and falling behind. If we can get some data early on, that will help us identify those kids at risk for dyslexia, but it will also it will help teachers understand better how to address those kids' needs. So, the Path Forward initiative doesn't actually get to what's going on at the school district, but that's certainly something I know the Department of Education is very much aware of. And I know that through this process, they have learned a lot. Through the hearings for the Dyslexia Task Force, for example. They come every year to Dyslexia Awareness Day, and they are aware of what's going on and what people's experiences are. And I can tell you it was very, very informative to hear from people around the state with a largely similar, it didn't matter where people were from, the issues they raised were the same issues throughout the state. And one of the things we were able to do in the budget was to fund the Center for Dyslexia and Dysgraphia, which was one of the recommendations in the Dyslexia Task Force. There are other recommendations that will take a little bit more time to build out.
Great. And Laura Varas is unmuted now if you want to ask your question.
Thank you. I have to admit I'm a little shy speaking to all of you, but I'd like to start by thanking you, Assemblywoman Simon and Dr. Young and Dr. Weatherton and Naomi Pena and Yoni. Bravo to Dr. Young. My question is largely colored by our experience of living in Rye City School District, where they're defending their position that remediation is not required for an education to be appropriate in federal court. So my question is, what do you think can be done with districts that take this position? Do you see a role maybe for real estate tax relief along the lines of a STAR credit? Or are there other ideas out of the box? Because it's really difficult when you're in a district that is adamant about not teaching reading to get your child taught to read.
See, I don't think more money is going to make them I would suggest you talk to the assembly member who represents Rye, who has come and been briefed on this initiative and is very supportive. But I don't think it's a property tax issue. I think a lot of it is they just don't know and they don't want to deal with it. And they resent having to deal with these kids. Now, remediation is one of those words that sometimes those of us in the field like to use, and it depends on what it is the school thinks remediation is. They're not going to make a child not be dyslexic, right? That's not going to happen. That they're going to be dyslexic the rest of their lives. What they can do is teach them how to read, so that they have fewer problems going forward. They can decode. Are they ever going to be really fast readers? Not likely. I know people who are lawyers, people who are my former clients who are doctors. They're slow readers, good readers, but they're slow, right? So what does remediation mean? I think you need to be very careful to not use words that give them an out, that give them ammunition to say, well, we're not going to be able to do that. They're supposed to provide reasonable accommodations. They're supposed to provide academic adjustments, right? Those are the kinds of things, those are the supports that will allow for that child's, the difficulties that the child have to not become the barriers to education success, right? The whole point of the law is to have implementation. For those of you, it's sort of an education case, but I think there's a lot to learn from the Casey Martin case, which was the golfer who had a severe mobility impairment and somewhat brittle bones, not quite, osteogenesis imperfecta kind of thing, but something else. And he wanted to use a golf cart in the PGA tournament, right? And they allow golf carts for the first 2 levels, but not the top level. And he was at the top level. And they actually went to court and complained about how you needed to be tired. Ben Hogan was tired and almost collapsed. And nobody understood that his tired is very different because he didn't have the legs Ben Hogan had. He had the legs he had that were, if he was too, he could actually break a leg by being too fatigued on the course. And so he won. And if he won that case because the judges all golfed and the judges all understood that the game of golf was about making a shot. The game of golf was not about fatigue. It was not about how you got from hole to hole. It was about making a shot. And I think that really solidified the notion of what an accommodation is and what the purpose of that is. The purpose of the golf cart was not to give him an edge. He was already coming at it from a deficit position because he was much more fatigued by walking than anybody else who was able-bodied would be. This enabled him to get from hole to hole so he could take that shot. I can give everybody a copy of that if people want a copy of that case. It's an old case, it's pre-ADA Amendments Act. It was something I cited in my testimony to the Senate when we were amending the ADA. But kids who are maybe not IDEA kids, they're 504 kids, but they're all protected under the ADA. So you know what? I don't care if it's an IEP thing. If it's an accommodation you're entitled to under a civil rights statute, and that's embodied in our state laws as well, they're entitled to that.
Okay, great. So our next question is, we have the Path Forward, the Dyslexia Task Force, and what will soon be a convening on Teacher Pipeline. How do they all fit together, and are there ways to make sure that the overlapping findings will be addressed holistically?
Well, that's a good question. I think that from my perspective, they are necessarily in tandem, right? And perhaps Dr. Young can talk more about the teacher pipeline you're talking about, right? But part of this Path Forward is to create the teacher pipeline with students who are currently in school. And provide them with that training and that experience in their practicum work. So Dr. Young, can you answer that part of that question?
Sure. One of the things we're doing, we've done actually within the state education department, is we've established what we're calling a P20 strategy. And we're trying to get away from just thinking about this as a P12 initiative, because you're absolutely right. Look, let's be candid about a couple of things. One of the characteristics of strong schools is that they do several things well at the same time. They don't do just one thing well. And I think when we think about education, these wheels all have to work together. What we do in teacher preparation, what we do in higher education, all of that has to work in tandem with what we're doing before. And so the idea for us is to move from a system that only looks at completion, but really looks at what I call success at the next level. That we've got to be committed to ensuring that young people have the skills, the knowledge, skills, dispositions they need to be successful at the next level, whatever that level is. That's very different than the way we think about schooling now. You know, we do, you know, the K-8 testing, we do the Regents testing, and it's really about, you know, completion, you know, to get them to complete and move. We're not asking the question, are they prepared to be successful at the next level? And I think that's really the critical issue. And as you were talking about remediation, I kept saying to myself that the goal has got to be how are we helping all children be successful, and not only be successful in their current grade, but how do we ensure that they're successful at the next level? And that means that we all have to be talking together, right? First thing it means is that we have to know what the next level is. And the next thing is we have to be talking together to ensure that there's this seamless strategy that's really designed to help young people be successful. The other thing that occurs, that I keep saying, and you know, this is an interesting one. We're a lot smarter about how children learn, grow, and develop today than we were 20 years ago, right? You when we started out, you were talking about the brain. Well, we know that a lot happens between birth and age 3, and yet that's really disconnected from what public schools are all about. And so we, you know, ultimately we've got to figure that out. We have to do a better job ensuring that we're taking advantage of the knowledge base that we have about how all children learn, grow, and develop, so that we can stop this conversation that I hear often. People say, well, you know, they're not ready. You know, they're not ready. They're not ready for kindergarten. They're not ready for pre-kindergarten. You know, I look, as an educator, I say, well, if they're not ready, what better place to get ready than school? I mean, I you know, we have to assume a responsibility for this, but I also think there are things that we have to do, and it requires this coordinated approach, and that's why we're talking about P20. You know, our commissioner has been advocating this. We now have a P20 work group. Path Forward is part of our P20 strategy, and I would envision that as we develop the strategy, you will hear more about P20 and less about only P12.
Great. So we have time for one more question. And there were some other questions that we didn't get to that we can try to share with a link to this video. And just some of them were good ideas and sort of good tips. So some of them were about just making sure that people who are older also get the resources they need because they're struggling in the workplace, and we're focusing on students, but adults need support as well. Somebody brought up the idea of, while you're bringing this to scale, does it make sense to reorganize elementary school to have ELA specific teachers? And then there were some other just questions about how well our schools are currently doing in supporting underlying cognitive sensory systems like auditory processing, visual tracking, vestibular integration. So we have a lot more questions, but so I'm putting that out there for everybody to think about. And we will give the last question to Adrienne Broman, who has her hand raised, and let's unmute you, Adrienne.
Adrienne?
Yes, I want to ask, what are we going to do for the older kids? Because the kids that have been failed, I'm a parent member in the Orchard Park School District, and I sit in on their meetings. And so far, I haven't heard any plans for older kids that have already been failed, that are in middle school or older. what are we going to do? Is there no hope for them? Is there no plan?
I would say of course, there's hope for them. It is a unfortunate circumstance that there are far too many kids in that situation. The path forward is about changing higher education so that that doesn't happen in the future. But we are very aware that we have kids in our school systems that were denied real instruction in reading, right? And many of those kids, as I said, are not dyslexic, but they just were not taught how to read. That's something that I think the Department of Education is becoming more and more aware of. It certainly is part of the testimony they've heard at various times. It's part of what Chancellor Young is talking about, a P20, that what they do in the schools directly, which is really not the path forward issue, like the product of the path forward issue is that this will not happen again in the future. Or it should be happening less and less frequently in the future as we get things moving. But that we need to address those issues. But those are really, unfortunately, beyond the scope of what the state legislature can do. We can't really pass a law saying thou shalt do X, Y, and Z every school district. But that's really about regulations that I think are going to be, where certainly more regulations will be forthcoming in terms of modifying them to be aligned with the science of reading. But that's also P through 20 regulation for where we have students that are high school students who are junior high school students who are not reading, and what we can do to help effectuate that. And then it really is a matter of the will of the school districts to engage, and what we can do to push that issue and demand some sort of accountability for them. And that may take a number of different, it may take a couple of different efforts to do that. I don't think there's any one answer to make a school district do their job. Many of them just don't even know what that is. They don't understand yet what the science of reading is. So we have to educate them as well. And that is something that, I'm certainly committed to doing. It's part of what I think is going to be the byproduct of going around and talking about the path forward, is that we will make others understand what this is about. We're not undertaking this effort, this massive effort in teacher education programs because we don't think that there's a real problem. And we have to address the issues of those older students who have been failed by our school systems. I know, Chancellor, if you have some words of wisdom there, or Maya, maybe you can have some words of wisdom in doing that as well.
Well, let me say this. I think this is an important question. And I think early on in this evening's discussion, I believe Dr. Weatherton talked about the importance of all 6 strategies working together. And I think for me, when we talk about improving teacher preparation, we're really talking about improving it at all levels for all students, right? We're not just focused. So, I know what the path forward is attempting to do, but we as the state education department and the Board of Regents, we're responsible for all teacher preparation. And we have to recognize that in order to do this job effectively, all of our teachers need to be better prepared to address the needs and context of all of our students. I mean, we've got to be very clear about something. Our state is going to be more diverse, not less diverse. And what that suggests is that we have to be more accommodating for a wider range of diversity. And that starts with our teacher preparation programs. And so while Path Forward is certainly focused on what are we doing in the early grades so that we can put more of our young our students on a trajectory towards success, that doesn't mean that we're doing it at the exclusion of our older students. And so we have to be better equipped to address the needs of the students that we have. And is that the answer. I think that's part of the answer. I think that every meeting that we have, that I've had with the deans of the schools of education, you know, what they say to me is this is not just a conversation about early learning and early childhood. This is a conversation about how we transform teacher preparation for all students. So I think there's a growing recognition that there needs to be change, and that's where we're starting. And we don't want to create a system that doesn't help young people. So I think we're going to get there. Are we there right now? No, we aren't. But I think it begins with a recognition that we need to get there, and we need to do it in a manner that's going to help as many of our young people as possible.
As we say in the legislature, I have a bill for that. So I want to thank you. I know people have been very gracious in their comments in the chat. We're going to be capturing that information so that we can try and address those issues going forward, because these are big issues, right? Too often we stratify things. And I think this P20 initiative is great because it really does point out that these things are connected, right? That we need to have a strategy going forward, you know, for sort of being able to bite off what we could chew. The path forward was earlier grades, but the reality is we all know that we need to be there for students in every grade. And that, you know, this is the kickoff of something that's going to produce results over time. Because you can't do everything immediately, right? And it's very hard to break through some of those notions and some of those feelings that you have and the school districts have, and the notion that they will try and shut you up, right? Because they're coming from a position where they're insecure. They don't have the resources to do this. They don't have the know-how to do this. When that happens, they're more likely to try and keep people from raising these issues. But, you know, we have to keep soldiering on, as they say, put one foot in front of the other and keep raising those issues. And I know that State Ed and the Board of Regents are right there behind us to support you in that. And I want to just say thank you to them and for their leadership in the path forward. Thank you again to Dr. Weatherton for pinch hitting for Dr. Hostetter and sharing with us your experience turning around Relay School of Education. It's a really critical piece of this that you've done, and we're very grateful to you for having done that. And thank you, Naomi Pena, for your involvement, for your leadership, for working with the LAC. We're going to have a new school. It's going to be in Brooklyn. There's going to be a new Literacy Academy school in Central Brooklyn. And we're really looking at building out those public schools that will be able to address the needs of our kids with disabilities. You know, there's a reason there's Windward and Churchill and Gaynor, and it's hard to get into them. And that's because there's not enough of it. There's not enough room for all the kids that really need this help. And so really the answer has been to build out the public school system. We tried that years ago. And the best we were able to do was to get a charter done on Staten Island, which turned out to be a blessing because it's worked very well and it's been a good model to follow. And it's something that we can say, see, it worked in Staten Island. The school is working. We can do this in the public school system. And now we have leadership in the public school system that has been much more responsive to that. And so I really want to say thank you to the leadership in our city public schools for, in fact, making sure that we can achieve that goal of starting those schools that are going to be better able to address our kids' literacy needs. So thank you, Naomi, for being one of the people that sort of kickstarted that and being the media darling that you have turned out to be. So I thank you all for the evening, for spending time with us this evening. We're a little over time, but that's because we have so much interest in this issue. I encourage everybody who can to come join us for our 10th anniversary of Dyslexia Advocacy Day in Albany. We're going to start at the Capitol, and we're going to be having a lot of activities. And of course, we'll be passing a resolution on the floor, and we'll be introducing the young people who are joining us on the floor, the assembly as well. So we're looking forward to that. It should be a great experience for everybody who attends. And with that, I will say thank you to my staff for working late, for doing all the legwork of getting this going. And also for all their help with planning Dyslexia Advocacy Day, and those folks who have helped us with the planning as well. Thank you so much. It's really critically important. And so kudos to my staff for doing all the work that they've been doing, and with such good humor, because sometimes I'm not easy to deal with. So anyway, so good night, everybody. We look forward to seeing as many of you as we can on Wednesday. Thank you again.